Chapter 528. Not long after leaving the room, Kana sent Gale and Doyle away and joined Yidder. They strolled down the corridor, engaged in conversation. From what I have observed so far, Hosanna is fundamentally quiet and quite a decent person. However, he's someone who would do anything for Nahan, Kana said. Just as Gale and Doyle described him, Yidder agreed. Exactly. Why is he so devoted to Nahan? Pondering on Yidder's question, Kana fell deep into thought. Well, Hosanna is often unconscious, and even when he's awake, his mind isn't exactly clear, making it hard to read information from him. But if I had to guess, I would say they have known each other since childhood. That seems to be the reason. Childhood. Nahan's childhood. Words that could only serve to further dry out Yidder's already barren imagination. If I were to summarize the scant information I can read from Hosanna about Nahan, it can be expressed very simply as the pitiful young lord. Yidder's eyes turned icy. That's not a thought a subordinate typically harbors? Exactly. Kana agreed. All the time he's awake, he worries about Nahan and feels guilt for his own sins. The guilt is so overwhelming that I can't even read any information about the sage, although it doesn't seem like he's hostile towards the sage per se. It's strange that Nahan, who is known to have different intentions than the sage, has a close comrade who isn't hostile towards the sage. That's why I plan to investigate further. Moreover, Kana said that Hosanna harbored no resentment toward Nahan, even under these circumstances. She even speculated that he would feel the same even if he were to die here. Is his slow recovery despite being awake due to his lack of will to live? Yidder thought. However, he had no intention of allowing Hosanna to die so pitifully. Feeling guilt means he's aware what he's done is wrong. I have no intention of letting him die in an escapist manner. So Kana, I'm counting on you to continue your good work in the subsequent investigations. Though the conversation continued as if they were responding to Gale and Doyle in truth, everything Kana had said was information Yidder had gleaned through her from Hosanna. Both the news that Nahan had not yet been captured and the news about the Star of Nagran appearing in the capital would likely confuse Hosanna. As the person who knew Nahan the best, he probably wouldn't take it well. Confusion would make it easier for Kana to read information and cooperate in investigations. Therefore, Yidder planned to discreetly leak information to Hosanna through Kana every time they learned something about the sage or the Star of Nagran, observing his reactions. Unlike simple-minded people like Gale and Doyle, Hosanna, as one of the Nahan's closest associates, was more likely to know something different from what they had gathered so far. Of course, if I notice anything strange, I'll call you immediately. Having had similar experiences before, Kana grinned, exuding confidence. She reached up to pat Yidder's back as she usually did, but paused mid-motion, then offered an awkward smile before striding away. I'll go ahead. See you later. ... And so, the day quickly disappeared as they dealt with various matters. After the party, the members of the cavalry sometimes looked at Yidder with a subtle gaze, but no one openly questioned him or changed their attitude. For this reason, Yidder continued to train and perform his duties with them as if nothing had changed. Whether he had received a noble title or had danced with the commander, none of these things seemed to change in matter of the current cavalry, which was a relief. The first moment he had to be by himself came after he had washed off the dust that clung to him after the training grounds and entered his own room. Walking past vases filled with dried flowers scattered around the room, Yidder picked a bundle of papers that sat on his bedside table. It was the translated research journal of the first Duke Tane, which he hadn't had time to properly read yet. Earlier that day, while training, he had taken an injured member to the medical division and briefly met with Anon. While the injured member was being treated by Lusan, Anon had stealthily approached Yidder and whispered, "You should come see me soon. I have finished reading the journal. This implied that Enon had found something of concern in the journal, so Udir knew he also needed to read it as soon as possible. Bound by a string, the very first page of the paper bundle displayed handwriting that could be considered textbook perfect. At the bottom was written a date indicating a time almost 1,000 years ago. Anyone who don't know what this was wouldn't realize that it was a research journal. As Udir gazed at the faint ink traces that Kishir had transcribed, he gently ran his finger over them. Flutter. His finger turned the page. The progress of my ongoing research has been deemed significant, and thus I have decided to document it in greater detail. The journal began with utter brevity. There was no grand introduction of the author or lofty exposition about his objectives. Neither were there elaborate personal anecdotes that people commonly included in diaries, nor lengthy accounts of emotional states experienced during the research. This must be why it was hard to immediately confirm that the first Duke Tane was the author, even if it was clear that Image had written it. He must have been incredibly practical and direct, Udir thought. The author had used the early parts of the journal to summarize his prior research. He had classified and organized the cursed ones, that is, monsters, and had tried to magically determine their strengths and weaknesses. Whenever other topics were occasionally mentioned, they were of the sort that stated how busy the author had been, delaying the progress of the research. It gave the sense of the author's deep obsession with this research. The vitality of the cursed ones is generally far stronger than that of humans. Even without magic, they often exert a similar strength. But that doesn't mean they don't die. The source of this is still unknown. Up until this point, the information would have been better shown to Helm than Udir, as it was general monster research. However, the content began to change as it moved into the middle sections. From a certain point, the author seemed to haphazardly begin and discontinue his classifications and summaries of monsters. Kishir had transcribed those sections as faithfully as possible, adding a note below that said, "It appears that the author frequently discontinued his writing." Intermingled with the haphazard research notes, content resembling a true diary began to appear. The author had frequent confrontations with someone. Although the name of this person was not mentioned, it wasn't hard to guess that the author had deeply shared and exchanged opinions about this research with that individual. However, unlike the author, who believed that a thorough understanding of monsters was essential for achieving his goals, his adversary seemed to think that research alone wouldn't suffice. If we could discover where those cursed beings come from, time itself, unyielding in its forward march, could also be on our side. When I spoke thus, my spiritual father gave no response. At last, Kishir came across a passage he had read long ago in Tenu. It was a part of the journal most filled with personal reflections. After reading, Kishir added a quick note, followed by a few annotations at the bottom. The term cursed beings used for monsters here is something I have seen in ancient records. It was only from the era of Second Emperor that they began to be referred to simply as monsters, and given name coined by researchers. The attempt to find out where monsters come from is considered unusual. Scriptures existed even back then, stating that these creatures were born from the cursed blood of the black moon that fell upon the world. So it's unlikely that they would not have known this. Spiritual father is an old term used among mages to refer to a master or mentor. While some similarities remain today, at that time, the teachings of a master were considered absolute. A mage without a master was not considered a proper mage, and records about such individuals are scarce. The last part was what captured Udir's attention. If the author of this journal is indeed Duke Blake Van Tane, then the spiritual father he mentions would be the Archmage Luma, who was his mentor. Kishore had quickly discerned this through a few words, based on Yudhir's own speculation. Yudhir quickly flipped through the journal. The term spiritual father appeared occasionally throughout. The author had multiple confrontations with his mentor, lamenting that his mentor did not seem to find value in his research. The author thought that his mentor harbored thoughts that weren't shared with him, and he was certain he was secretly conducting other research. If his mentor was indeed Luma, then his suspicion was likely not misplaced. Eventually, the long standing feud between the journal's author and his spiritual father came to an end, marked by a statement that he had lost contact with his spiritual father for an extended period.